The ticking of the wall clock was the loudest sound in the Midoriya apartment. It had been that way for 12 years. Inko Midoriya sat at her small dining table, a half-empty mug of green tea growing cold between her hands. She was 43 now, though the lines bracketing her eyes and the silver threads woven through her dark green hair made her look older. The television hummed quietly in the background, a low murmur of news anchors discussing a recent villain attack, but Inko wasn't listening. Her gaze, as it did every evening, drifted to the small shrine resting on the bookshelf in the corner. There sat a framed photograph of a 4-year-old boy with a mess of curly green curls, a constellation of freckles across his cheeks, and a smile so bright it outshone the sun. In the photo, he was clutching a limited edition All Might action figure, his eyes wide with the dream of one day becoming a hero. That was the last photo she had ever taken of him. The day after the doctor had coldly informed them that Izuku was quirkless, the boy had wandered into the dense, ancient woods resting on the outskirts of Mizurufu. He had been looking for bugs, or perhaps just looking for a place to cry where his mother wouldn't hear him. He never came back. The police had scoured the woods for weeks. Pro-heroes with tracking quirks, thermal quirks, and sensory quirks had combed every inch of the soil. They found nothing. No torn clothes, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the earth itself had opened its maw and swallowed Izuku Midoriya whole. Eventually, the search was called off. The world moved on. Heroes Society kept spinning, obsessed with the next big debut, the next flashy quirk. But Inko never moved on. She remained in this apartment, paying the rent, keeping his room exactly as he had left it, waiting for a boy who the world had written off as a tragic statistic. Knock. 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 Inko jumped, nearly spilling her lukewarm tea. The sound was not the frantic, rapid-fire pounding of a delivery man, nor the authoritative rap of a landlord. It was a measured, rhythmic sound. Peaceful, deliberate. She stood, brushing a stray wrinkle from her skirt, and padded toward the entryway. Coming, she called out, her voice slightly raspy from disuse. She unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, ready to politely decline whatever salesman had wandered onto her floor. The words died in her throat. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a young man. He was tall, perhaps standing around 5'9", with a physique that spoke of lean, forged muscle beneath his strange attire. He was not wearing a school uniform, nor the casual streetwear of a teenager. He wore layers of rough-spun, desert-tan fabric, a tunic folded neatly over his chest, layered with dark brown tabards that hung past his waist. A wide, worn leather belt strapped it all together, and heavy, dirt-scuffed boots covered his calves. Hanging from a clip on his belt was a metallic cylinder, gleaming with chromium and black ridges. But it was his face that made the breath vanish from Inko's lungs. The boy's jaw was sharp and defined, weathered by sun and time, but across his cheeks was a familiar, undeniable constellation of diamond-shaped freckles. His hair was a wild, untamable mop of dark forest green, tied back loosely at the nape of his neck with a leather cord, though a few rebellious curls framed his face. Then, he opened his eyes. They were a vivid, luminous emerald, but they held an age and a depth that defied the boy's youth. They were pools of absolute, unshakable serenity. "Hello, Mom," the teenager said. His voice was a rich, smooth baritone, calm as a quiet tide. The world tilted on its axis. Inko's vision tunneled. Her knees buckled beneath her as a choked, broken sound tore its way up her throat. 12 years of repressed agony, of silent nights weeping into a pillow, of staring at empty chairs and silent playgrounds, hit her all at once like a physical blow. She was collapsing, the darkness of a dead faint rushing up to meet her. She never hit the floor. Before she could even register the movement, the young man was there. He hadn't rushed, yet he had crossed the threshold in a blur of motion so smooth it defied gravity. He caught her by the shoulders, lowering her gently to her knees, sinking down to the tatami mat with her. Izuku? She gasped, her chest heaving. Hyperventilation set in. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her quirk, the minor ability to attract small objects, flared wildly out of control in her panic. Keys, pens, and loose change rattled on the nearby countertops, floating into the air. You're a dream. You're not real. I'm dreaming. I am here, Mom. I am real, Izuku said softly. He didn't call for a doctor. He didn't shout or panic. Instead, Izuku closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. The frantic, suffocating panic gripping Inko's chest met an invisible, sweeping wave of warmth. It felt like stepping out of a freezing rainstorm into a sunlit room. A profound sense of peace washed over her mind, heavy and sweet, smelling faintly of ozone and ancient forests. The floating objects in the apartment slowly drifted back to their resting places. The violent trembling in Inko's hands ceased. She looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with awe. She could feel him in the room, not just physically, but as a radiant, comforting presence that seemed to hum in the very air around them. Breathe with me, Izuku instructed gently, maintaining eye contact. Inko obeyed, inhaling deeply as he did, the panic evaporating into the warm aura he was projecting. She reached out a trembling hand, pressing her palm against his rough, stubble-dusted cheek. It was warm, he was solid. My baby, she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck, burying her face into the rough fabric of his tunic. My baby boy. Where did you go? Where have you been? Izuku wrapped his arms around her, returning the embrace with a gentle, grounding strength. For a brief moment, the Jedi Master vanished, and the 16-year-old boy who had missed his mother allowed a single tear to slip down his cheek. I was very far away, Mom, Izuku whispered, resting his chin on the crown of her head. I fell through a gateway, a tear in the fabric of the universe. I ended up in a galaxy far from here. It sounded like madness, the plot of a science fiction comic. But held in his arms, enveloped in the inexplicable, supernatural peace he radiated, Inko believed him implicitly. Were you alone? She wept, clutching his tabards as if he might vanish if she let go. Were you scared? I was at first, Izuku admitted softly. But I was found. I was taken in by a group of peacekeepers. Monks, philosophers, warriors. They called themselves the Jedi. They saw that I had a connection to the energy of the universe, and they raised me. They taught me how to listen. How to find peace. He pulled back slightly, wiping the tears from his mother's cheeks with his thumb. I am a Jedi Master now, Mom. I have seen the stars. But when my trials were complete, the Force, the energy that binds everything together, guided me back to the anomaly. It guided me home to you. Inko didn't understand most of the words he was saying. Galaxy. Jedi. The Force. It didn't matter. Her son, her little quirkless boy who had been mocked and pitted, had returned as a man of extraordinary presence. You're home, she cried, smiling through her tears. You're really home. I am, Izuku said, a genuine, warm smile gracing his features. And I'm not leaving you again. 3 days later, Izuku Midoriya stepped out onto the bustling streets of Musudafu. The readjustment period had been intense, yet filled with a quiet joy. He had spent hours sitting with Inko, drinking tea and listening to her summarize the last 12 years of Earth's history. He spoke to her of his master, a stern but kind Keldor named Plo-kun who had found him wandering the lower levels of Coruscant. He spoke of the Jedi Temple, of the archives, of his lightsaber, and of the Force. He had deliberately spared her the details of the skirmishes, the Sith remnants, and the darker aspects of the galaxy, focusing instead on the peace he had found. Now, with his mother resting peacefully at home, Izuku needed to acclimatize himself to this world. He walked with perfect posture, his hands tucked neatly into the wide sleeves of his brown outer robe. The hood was pulled down, allowing the afternoon sun to warm his green hair. To a Jedi Master, stepping into a modern, quirk-filled city was a staggering sensory experience. The Force was an energy field created by all living things. It surrounded them, penetrated them, and bound the galaxy together. On Coruscant, the Force felt like a massive, swirling ocean of millions of overlapping currents. But Earth was different. Here, 80% of the population possessed a quirk, a biological mutation that altered their very genetic makeup. To Izuku's senses, quirks felt like sharp, vibrant spikes in the Force. Some felt like burning fires, others like cold rivers, and others still like jagged, dissonant static. It was chaotic, loud, and incredibly unbalanced. As he walked down the sidewalk, people parted for him. Some stared at his strange robes, assuming it was part of a mutant quirk or a localized fashion statement. Izuku paid them no mind, his awareness expanding outward in a spherical radius, taking in the heartbeat of the city. He paused at a crosswalk, his eyes drifting up to a massive digital billboard. It displayed a beautiful, blonde woman in a skin-tight, purple and cream bodysuit, winking at the camera while holding a can of energy drink. The text read, "Mount Lady says, stay giant, stay hydrated." Izuku tilted his head. Hero Society. His mother had explained how the profession of hero had evolved into a commercial enterprise. Individuals with powerful quirks were licensed by the government to enforce the law, but their success was measured in popularity polls, merchandise sales, and media coverage. A quiet sorrow flickered in Izuku's chest. The Jedi were peacekeepers. They sought no reward, no fame, and held no attachments to material wealth. The concept of commercializing the act of saving a life, of turning altruism into an ego-driven spectacle, felt deeply flawed to him. It was a path that, in the wider galaxy, often led individuals toward the dark side. Greed, pride, and the desire for adoration were dangerous anchors for those wielding power. Do not judge them, Izuku, he reminded himself, letting the negative thought flow out of his mind like water over a stone. They are bound by the culture of their world. You are merely an observer. Suddenly, a disturbance rippled through the force. It was sharp. Violent. It tasted of sulfur, fear, and desperate, uncontrolled rage. Izuku opened his eyes, pivoting on his heel. The disturbance was a few blocks away, in the shopping district. Distantly, he heard the muffled boom of an explosion, followed by the screams of civilians. A normal civilian would run away. A pro-hero would sprint toward the scene, eager to act. Izuku did neither. He simply adjusted his path, his strides lengthening, his breathing falling into a rhythmic, meditative cadence. He moved with the swift, silent grace of a predator, though his intent was purely protective. When he arrived at Tatooine's shopping arcade, the area was in utter chaos. A crowd of onlookers had gathered, held back by a perimeter established by local pro-heroes. Fires raged in the narrow alleyway, licking at the brick walls of the shops. Izuku slipped through the crowd effortlessly. He didn't push or shove, he simply anticipated the movements of the people, stepping through the gaps in their bodies like a ghost. He reached the front line and assessed the situation with the clinical, unbothered eye of a veteran commander. In the center of the alley was a massive, undulating mountain of rancid, dark green sludge. The entity possessed a grotesque set of eyes and a jagged maw, cackling wildly. But the sludge was not just a villain, it was a cage. Trapped within the viscous liquid was a teenage boy, fighting fiercely. The boy's hands were sparking with violent, nitroglycerin-fueled explosions, detonating wildly in a desperate attempt to break free. But the sludge only absorbed the blasts, using the boy's own power to set the surrounding alley on fire. Izuku glanced at the pro-heroes present. A large man with hazard-striped arms, death arms, was shouting at the crowd to stay back. A hero made of wood, Kamui Woods, was recoiling from the flames, his quirk rendered useless by the fire. The giant woman from the billboard, Mount Lady, was standing on the street, lamenting that she couldn't fit into a two-lane alleyway. They were waiting. They were waiting for someone with a better quirk to handle the situation. They were watching a child suffocate because the scenario did not perfectly align with their specific skill sets. Izuku felt a brief flare of disapproval, but he released it into the force. There was no time for judgment. There was only the present moment. He shifted his gaze back to the boy in the sludge. Through the frantic, suffocating panic radiating from the victim, Izuku sensed something familiar. It was a jagged, explosive, prideful signature in the force. He recognized that angry energy, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku remembered the blonde boy from his childhood. Kaken. The boy who had manifested a powerful quirk, who had grown arrogant, who had told Izuku he was worthless. In the grand tapestry of the force, Katsuki's anger was a blinding, erratic beacon. Right now, that beacon was flickering, drowning in terror as oxygen was denied to his brain. "Hey! Kid, get back here!" Death Arms bellowed, reaching out a meaty hand. Izuku was already moving. He ducked beneath the hero's outstretched arm, stepping past the police tape and walking directly into the burning alleyway. Are you crazy? You'll die. Kamui Woods shouted, stepping forward, but a sudden, inexplicable invisible wall seemed to press against his chest, halting his advance. Izuku ignored them. He walked slowly, his brown robes billowing slightly from the heat of the fires. His hands remained tucked peacefully inside his sleeves. He did not reach for the lightsaber at his belt. A weapon was not needed here. What's this? The sludge villain roared, his fluid body shifting as he glared down at the approaching figure. Another hero wannabe? Get lost, kid! I've got my meat suit, and I'm getting out of here. Katsuki, half submerged in the slime, managed to turn his head. His crimson eyes, bloodshot and wide with panic, locked onto the boy in the robes. He couldn't scream, his mouth filled with sludge, but his mind roared in confusion. Izuku stopped 10 paces from the monstrous mass of sludge. You are causing unnecessary pain, Izuku said. His voice was not loud, but it carried perfectly over the roar of the flames and the explosions, ringing with an unnatural, resonant authority. Release him. The sludge villain laughed, a wet gurgling sound. Make me, brat. Once I take over this kid's body, not even All Might will. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't take a fighting stance. He didn't yell. He simply dropped his hands from his sleeves and raised his right hand, palm facing the villain, his fingers slightly splayed. He reached out into the living force, visualizing the molecules of the sludge, the frantic kinetic energy of the villain, and the space he occupied. And with a gentle, yet utterly indomitable exertion of will, Izuku commanded the universe to stop. Force stasis. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The sludge villain, who had been mid-cackle, froze. It was not like ice, nor was it a physical paralyzation. It was as if time itself had ceased to exist for the entity. A stray droplet of sludge that had been flying through the air halted, suspended perfectly in midair. The villain's eyes were locked in place, his shifting, liquid body suddenly holding the rigidity of reinforced titanium. The roaring crowd fell dead silent. The pro-heroes gasped. Katsuki Bakugo, still trapped inside the sludge, suddenly realized the crushing pressure around his chest was gone. The sludge wasn't holding him anymore. It was just there, frozen like concrete. Now, Izuku murmured. He curled the fingers of his raised hand, visualizing Katsuki, and pulled his arm sharply backward. Force pull. Katsuki felt an invisible, massive hand wrap around his entire body. With a sickening shloop, he was violently yanked backward out of the frozen sludge. He flew through the air, flailing wildly. Before Katsuki could hit the asphalt, Izuku shifted his hand, slowing the blonde boy's momentum. Katsuki landed gently on his feet beside Izuku, though his knees immediately buckled, sending him coughing and hacking onto the pavement, gasping for sweet, glorious air. Izuku stepped in front of Katsuki, shielding him. He kept his right hand raised, maintaining the stasis on the villain. He looked over his shoulder at the stunned pro-heroes. The entity is contained, Izuku called out, his voice serene. Bring your receptacles. I will not hold him forever. Death Arms was the first to snap out of his stupor. Right. Kamui, get the containment unit. The heroes rushed forward. They didn't understand what quirk the boy was using, but they recognized an opening when they saw one. Kamui Woods extended his lacquered wooden branches, wrapping them tightly around the frozen sludge villain, while Death Arms brought over a heavy-duty, villain containment barrel. I am releasing my hold, Izuku warned. He lowered his hand. Instantly, the sludge villain regained his mobility, collapsing into a puddle with a wet splash, screaming in confusion. But it was too late. Kamui's branches scooped the weakened, disoriented slime into the barrel, and Death Arms slammed the lid shut, locking it tight. It was over. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers. The fire department rushed in to douse the remaining flames. Izuku let out a quiet breath, feeling the tension bleed out of the air. He turned his attention down to Katsuki, who was on his hands and knees still coughing up remnants of sewer water. Izuku knelt smoothly, the hem of his robes sweeping the dirt. He reached out, resting a gentle hand on Katsuki's back. He channeled a tiny fraction of force healing, not enough to knit bone, but enough to soothe the boy's burning lungs and calm his racing heart. Katsuki flinched at the touch, his head snapping up. Don't touch me. he rasped, his pride deeply wounded. He glared at his savior. Then Katsuki froze. He stared at the messy green hair. He stared at the diamond freckles. He stared at those emerald eyes. The clothes were weird, the height was different, the aura was completely alien. But Katsuki Bakugo had known that face since he was in diapers. Deku? Katsuki whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You're dead. You went missing. Hello, Katsuki, Izuku replied softly. There was no fear in his voice, no stutter, no flinching away from the blonde's aggressive glare. It has been a long time. I am glad you are safe. Hey, kid! Izuku looked up. Death Arms, Kamui Woods, and a few police officers were marching toward them. The media was already swarming against the police tape, cameras flashing like strobe lights. That was incredibly reckless. Death Arms barked, though he looked conflicted. You charged into an active scene without a license. But your quirk, whatever telekinesis that was, you saved his life. We need your name, kid, and a statement. Izuku stood up, towering slightly over the pro-heroes. He looked at the flashing cameras, the eager reporters, and the heroes waiting for him to justify his existence in their system. He had no desire to be part of their circus. He had not saved Katsuki for praise, or for a license, or for the cameras. He had done it because it was the will of the Force. Izuku raised his hand, sweeping 2 fingers in a subtle, horizontal arc in front of the heroes and the closest police officers. He tapped into the Force, brushing against their minds. It was a simple trick, easily resisted by those with strong mental shielding, but devastatingly effective against those who were distracted or easily led. Jedi mind trick. You do not need to speak with me, Izuku said, his voice carrying a strange, echoing duality that bypassed their ears and spoke directly into their subconscious. Death Arms blinked, his aggressive posture instantly relaxing. His eyes glazed over for a fraction of a second. We do not need to speak with you, the pro-hero repeated in a dull monotone. I am just a passing citizen, Izuku continued, waving his fingers again. You will let me leave, and you will focus on the cleanup. You are just a passing citizen, Kamui Woods murmured, nodding slowly. We will let you leave, and focus on the cleanup. Have a peaceful evening, Izuku said, bowing his head respectfully. The heroes turned around, immediately shouting orders at the police to secure the perimeter and direct the fire crews, completely forgetting that the boy in the brown robes even existed. Katsuki watched this exchange from the ground, his jaw hanging slack. He had seen mind control quirks before, but the absolute, terrifying ease with which Deku had just hijacked the minds of multiple pro-heroes made his stomach churn. Izuku pulled his hood up over his head, casting his face into deep shadow. Wait, Katsuki rasped, forcing himself to his feet, his hands sparking defensively. Wait a damn minute. Deku! Where the hell have you been? What the hell was that quirk? Izuku paused. He looked back at his childhood tormentor. He felt the swirl of confusion, anger, and inferiority brewing in Katsuki's mind. Once, that anger would have terrified Izuku. Now, it only elicited a profound sense of pity. I have no quirk, Katsuki, Izuku said quietly, the truth ringing in the air. I have the Force. And I have returned. Before Katsuki could yell another demand, Izuku turned. He stepped into the chaotic flow of the crowd, his brown robes blending with the shadows of the late afternoon. In the blink of an eye, he was gone, moving with the currents of the Force, leaving Hero Society completely unaware that a master of a different caliber had just entered their world. The lost son had returned. And he brought the peace of the stars with him. The scent of burning incense and jasmine tea drifted through the Midoriya apartment, weaving a quiet tranquility that had been absent for over a decade. In the center of his small bedroom, Izuku Midoriya sat in a perfect lotus position. He hovered exactly 3 inches above the tatami mats. Around him, a few small objects, a pencil, a notebook, a pebble he had picked up from the street, orbited his body in a slow, hypnotic planetary rotation. His eyes were closed. His breathing was so shallow, so perfectly controlled, that his chest barely seemed to move. To the untrained eye, he was simply meditating. But to Izuku, he was touching the very fabric of the cosmos. The Force was everywhere, even on this earth. It flowed through the ancient trees on the outskirts of the city, through the bustling crowds downtown, and through his mother sleeping peacefully in the next room. However, the force here felt distinctly different from the galaxy he had left behind. On Coruscant, or the sacred grounds of Tython, the force was a vast, deep ocean, echoing with the whispers of thousands of Jedi who had come before. Here, the force was wild, untamed. The genetic mutations the inhabitants called quirks were like sudden, localized storms in the energy field. Every time a person used a quirk, it sent ripples through the force, flares of heat, bursts of static, or sudden vacuums of pressure. It was a cacophony of unbalanced energy. Izuku slowly exhaled, allowing gravity to reclaim him. He touched down on the tatami mats with complete silence. The floating objects gently settled onto his desk. He opened his eyes as the door creaked open. Inko stood there, a tray with a steaming mug of tea in her hands. She smiled, though the shadows of lingering worry still danced in her eyes. 12 years of absence could not be entirely erased in a single month, but they were healing. "Good morning, Izuku," she said softly, setting the tray on his low desk. "Good morning, Mom. You slept well." "I could feel your mind resting," Izuku replied, a warm smile gracing his features. He uncrossed his legs and stood, the rough brown fabric of his Jedi tunic whispering against the floor. Inko sat on the edge of his bed, wringing her hands slightly. "Izuku, we need to talk about your future." Izuku took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth settle in his stomach. "I am here to protect you, Mom. And to learn about this world. That is my future for now." "I know, honey. And I love having you home." "More than anything," Inko said, her voice trembling slightly. "But you can't just stay in this apartment forever, meditating and reading the news. And I saw the news reports from a few weeks ago. The sludge villain." Izuku set his mug down. "I did what was necessary to preserve a life. The local authorities were unequipped for the situation." "I'm not mad that you saved Katsuki," Inko said quickly. "You're a hero, Izuku. You've always had the heart of a hero, even before you went away. But this society has rules. If you go around using your force to stop villains without a license, the police will brand you a vigilante. They'll arrest you. I can't lose you to a prison cell after just getting you back." Izuku considered this. The Jedi were bound by the laws of the Republic, but they also answered to a higher calling. To be constrained by bureaucratic licensing to save a life seemed absurd, but he understood his mother's fear. "What do you propose?" Inko reached into her apron and pulled out a glossy, high-quality brochure. She set it on the desk. The letters UA were stamped boldly in gold across the front. "UA High School," Inko said. "It's the top hero academy in the country. The entrance exam is in 2 days. If you pass, you can get a provisional license in a year. You'd be protected by the law. You'd have teachers. And..." She looked down, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "You'd be around teenagers your own age. You've spent your whole life fighting in the stars, Izuku. I just want you to experience being a normal boy. Or at least, as normal as you can be." Izuku looked at the brochure. He picked it up, his long fingers tracing the gold foil. A Hero Academy. The concept was somewhat analogous to the Jedi Temple, though from his research on the HoloNet, or rather, the Internet, the curriculum was vastly different. They taught combat, rescue, and media relations. They did not teach philosophy, detachment, or the nature of the universe. Yet, as he held the brochure, he reached out with his feelings. He let the Force guide him. He felt a strange pull toward the institution. A knot of tangled destinies resided within those walls. He sensed darkness looming on the horizon of this world, a shadow that had touched the sludge villain incident. If he was to protect this world, and perhaps guide its wielders of power toward a path of true peace, UA would be the nexus point. "A school for peacekeepers," Izuku murmured. He looked up, his emerald eyes meeting his mother's. "If it brings you peace of mind, Mom, I will go. I will take this exam." Inko beamed, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "Thank you, Izuku. I'll submit your application online right now." As she bustled out of the room, Izuku looked back down at the brochure. He reached out to his belt, resting his hand on the cold, ridged metal of his lightsaber hilt. "We have a new mission," he whispered to the kyber crystal within. The crystal hummed in response, sending a warm, resonant pulse of green light through the force directly into his mind. 2 days later, the morning sun bathed the towering, H-shaped glass structure of UA High School in a brilliant golden light. Thousands of middle school students milled about the front gates, buzzing with nervous energy. They wore their various school uniforms, chattering excitedly about the practical exam, sizing each other up, and boasting about their quirks. Amidst the sea of dark Gakurin uniforms and sailor suits, Izuku Midoriya stood out like a solitary ancient tree in a forest of saplings. He had declined his old Aldera Junior High uniform, as it no longer fit his shoulders, nor did it align with his identity. Instead, he wore the traditional garb of the Jedi Order. His base layer was a long-sleeved, dark brown undertunic, overlaid with a lighter, desert tan tunic. 2 wide tabards of the same tan material hung over his shoulders and fell past his waist, bound securely by a wide, worn leather utility belt. His dark brown trousers were tucked neatly into knee-high leather boots that had walked the sands of Tatooine and the metal corridors of Coruscant. Hidden beneath the folds of his outer brown robe, his lightsaber hung securely at his hip. He had declared it a support item on his application. As he walked up the paved path toward the main building, the chatter around him died down. Teenagers stopped and stared. "Whoa, look at that guy," a boy whispered. "Is he wearing a cosplay? What's with the robes? Maybe it's his quirk." "Like a monk quirk? He looks so calm." "It's creeping me out." Izuku ignored the whispers. He walked with a measured, even stride, his hands tucked comfortably into his opposite sleeves. He was extending his senses, feeling the chaotic swirl of emotions around him. Anxiety, ambition, fear, and excitement battered against his mental shields like rain against the window pane. He breathed in, anchoring himself in the light, letting the emotions of others flow past him without touching him. "Out of my way, extras!" A harsh, aggressive voice shattered the morning air. Izuku didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The jagged, explosive signature in the force was unmistakable. Katsuki Bakugo stomped up the pathway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched in a perpetual display of hostility. The crowd parted for him instinctively. Katsuki's crimson eyes locked onto Izuku's back. He marched faster, intending to shoulder-check the strange boy in the robes. Ever since the sludge villain incident, Katsuki's mind had been a tempest. The idea that Deku, the quirkless loser who had gone missing, had returned and casually humiliated the pro-heroes, saved his life, and claimed to have no quirk, it infuriated him. It defied all logic. Katsuki aimed his shoulder directly at Izuku's spine. "Move it, duh!" Izuku didn't turn around. He didn't even break his stride. But as Katsuki's shoulder was an inch away from making contact, Izuku executed a pivot so flawlessly smooth it looked like a choreographed dance. He stepped lightly to the side. Katsuki, overcommitting to the shove, stumbled forward, his balance entirely thrown off. He pitched forward toward the pavement. Before Katsuki could hit the ground, Izuku pulled a hand from his sleeve and made a gentle, upward flicking motion with his fingers. Katsuki stopped falling. He hovered, suspended a mere 2 inches above the concrete, completely paralyzed by an invisible, unyielding grip. "Patience, Katsuki," Izuku's calm voice floated over him. "Anger clouds the mind and throws the body off balance." Izuku lowered his hand, and the invisible grip vanished. Katsuki dropped the remaining 2 inches to the ground with a grunt. He scrambled up, his palms already sparking with tiny, furious explosions. "You bastard! Don't use your damn voodoo trick on me!" Katsuki snarled, though he kept his distance, the memory of the frozen sludge villain flashing in his mind. "It is not a trick. It is simply the flow of energy," Izuku replied gently, turning to face him. He pulled his hood back, revealing his messy green hair and serene emerald eyes. "Good luck on your exam today. Try to find your center." Izuku turned and continued walking, leaving a seething, utterly baffled Bakugo in his wake. As Izuku approached the massive front doors, he felt a sudden spike of alarm in the force behind him. A girl with a round face and a short bob of brown hair had tripped over her own feet. She was pitching forward, her hands flailing, bracing for a painful impact with the brick path. Izuku didn't run. He simply turned, extended his hand, and reached out with the force. Achiko Uraraka squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the harsh scrape of concrete. Instead, she felt a soft, warm pressure envelop her entire body. She stopped midair, floating gently as if she were submerged in a pool of water. She opened her eyes, gasping in shock. She was hovering. But she hadn't activated her zero-gravity quirk. Slowly, she was rotated upright and set gently onto her feet. She looked up and saw a tall boy in strange, rustic robes lowering his hand. "Are you unharmed?" Izuku asked, his tone laced with genuine concern. Yeah. I'm okay," Achiko stammered, patting her uniform. She looked at him in awe. "Wow. Was that your quirk? You stopped me with your mind. That's so cool." "It was no trouble," Izuku said, offering a small, polite bow. "Be mindful of your steps. The path ahead is long." Without waiting for a response, Izuku turned and walked into the building. Achiko stared after him, her cheeks dusting with pink. "What a weird, but nice guy," she muttered. The written portion of the exam was, to Izuku, a trivial matter. He had spent the last 12 years in the Jedi archives on Coruscant, studying quantum mechanics, hyperspace navigation, galactic history, and advanced xenobiology. The mathematics and sciences of Earth were remarkably primitive in comparison. He completed the dense, 2-hour exam in 45 minutes. For the remainder of the time, he sat in silent meditation, much to the annoyance of the proctors who thought he had simply given up. Following the written exam, the massive crowd of applicants was herded into a colossal auditorium for the orientation. Izuku took his assigned seat. To his right sat Katsuki, who immediately scowled and slouched in his chair. Izuku simply rested his hands on his lap, closed his eyes, and sank into a light trance to pass the time. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight snapped onto the stage. The voice hero, Present Mike, struck a dynamic pose, screaming into the microphone. "What's up, UA candidates? Let me hear you say hey." Silence. The applicants were far too nervous to respond. Present Mike's sweat dropped but recovered quickly. "Keeping it mellow, huh? That's fine. I'm here to give you the lowdown on the practical exam. Are you ready?" Present Mike clicked a remote, and a massive screen behind him illuminated, displaying a map of various urban battlegrounds and silhouettes of robots. He explained the rules: a 10-minute time limit in a mock cityscape, destroying robots designated as 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers to rack up a score. Your goal is to use your quirks to smash as many of these faux villains as you can. Mike yelled. But remember, no attacking other examinees. That's strictly. Excuse me. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and neatly combed blue hair shot up from his seat in the middle of the auditorium. He pointed a rigid arm toward the stage. Sir, the printout shows 4 types of villains, not 3. If this is a misprint, it is deeply shameful for UA, the premier hero academy. The boy then whipped around, his arms slicing through the air to point directly at Izuku. And you, the one in the strange costume. Izuku, whose eyes were still closed, tilted his head slightly. Yes? You have been sitting there with your eyes closed this entire presentation. If you are asleep, then you are taking this exam as a joke. You should leave immediately and stop insulting the hard work of everyone here. The boy barked. The auditorium went dead silent. Everyone stared at the boy in the robes. Katsuki let out a low, mocking scoff. Izuku opened his eyes. He didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, his baritone voice carried perfectly across the massive room, completely unbothered by the accusation. I am not asleep, my friend, Izuku said calmly. I am listening. True listening requires more than just the ears. When you close your eyes to the visual distractions of the world, the mind becomes a still pond, capable of reflecting the truth of what is being spoken. Izuku looked up at Present Mike. The pro-hero Present Mike was just about to explain the 4th robot. You interrupted him out of an anxious need for control. Patience is the first lesson of any warrior. The blue-haired boy, Tenya Ida, froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He had expected the boy to stutter, apologize, or lash out. He had not expected to be effortlessly psychoanalyzed and lectured by a teenager who sounded like an 80-year-old monk. I apologize, Ida said rigidly, bowing perfectly at a 90-degree angle. I spoke out of turn. He sat down quickly, his face flushed. President Mike blinked behind his orange shades, thoroughly impressed. Right. Thanks for the assist, examinee 7111. Like the young master here said, the fourth robot is the zero-pointer. It's an obstacle, a massive gimmick that will rampage through the tight spaces. My advice? Run away from it. It's not worth your time. The orientation concluded shortly after. The applicants were directed to change into their athletic gear and board buses headed to their respective testing grounds. Izuku did not change. He simply adjusted his utility belt, ensured his lightsaber was secure, and boarded the bus to Battle Center B. Battle Center B was a breathtaking feat of engineering. It was a fully constructed, life-sized replica of a metropolitan city district, complete with high-rises, narrow alleyways, and functional traffic lights. Massive metal gates stood shut, holding back the anxious tide of applicants. Izuku stood near the back of the crowd. He watched the other teenagers stretching, hyperventilating, and hyping themselves up. He saw the brown-haired girl, Uraraka, slapping her own cheeks to steel her nerves. He saw the blue-haired boy, Ida, doing aggressive high knees. They were preparing for war. They were preparing to break, to smash, to conquer. Izuku took a deep breath. He let the city speak to him through the Force. He felt the cold, unliving hum of thousands of mechanical parts waiting within the city. They were not alive. They had no presence in the Force, only a void where life should be. But the machinery had a rhythm. Wires, power cores, optical sensors. They were bound by the laws of physics, and the Force commanded the physical world. He did not need to destroy. A Jedi's goal was to neutralize the threat with the minimum amount of force necessary. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice suddenly boomed from unseen speakers. Get moving! There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The massive gates shrieked as they opened. The crowd of applicants surged forward like water breaking a dam, screaming battle cries as they stampeded into the fake city. Izuku did not run. He stepped forward, letting his mind sink into the current of the Force. Force speed. To the naked eye, it looked as though Izuku simply vanished. He became a blur of brown and tan, slipping through the gaps in the crowd with impossible agility, his boots barely touching the pavement. He overtook the frontrunners in a matter of seconds, bypassing Ida and Uraraka entirely. He rounded the first corner and encountered his first target. A two-pointer. The robot rolled forward on its treads, its red optical sensor locking onto Izuku. Target acquired, it buzzed mechanically. It raised a mounted machine gun, firing a barrage of rubber bullets. Izuku didn't break his stride. He leaped into the air, performing a flawless, twisting front flip over the barrage of projectiles. As he passed directly over the robot's head, he reached out with his hand. He didn't use pure telekinesis to crush the machine. That was brutish and wasteful. Instead, he used Mechidaru, a nuanced application of the Force that allowed a Jedi to sense and manipulate the internal mechanisms of technology. Izuku felt the primary power cable connecting the robot's battery to its central processor. With a microscopic, precise pinch of the Force, he disconnected the cable. He landed softly behind the robot and continued walking. Behind him, the two-pointer's red eye flickered and died. Its arms went limp, and it ground to a complete halt, completely disabled but physically undamaged. A few streets over, another group of applicants was struggling against a cluster of 3 one-pointers. A boy with a sparkling naval laser was firing wildly, destroying the facades of the buildings but barely scratching the agile robots. Izuku appeared on the rooftop above them. He extended both hands downward. He reached into the optical sensors of all 3 robots simultaneously. Using a variation of the Jedi mind trick, adapted for rudimentary AI logic circuits, he scrambled their target recognition software. The robots suddenly stopped. They turned their heads, their sensors flashing blue instead of red. Targets lost. Recalibrating, they announced. They spun around in circles, completely ignoring the stunned applicants, rendering themselves non-threats. The path is clear, Izuku called down to the applicants, his voice echoing from the rooftop. Keep moving. He bounded across the rooftops, moving like a phantom. He didn't smash. He didn't explode. He neutralized. He severed drive belts, disconnected power cells, and inverted steering commands. Within 6 minutes, Izuku had disabled over 30 robots without a single scratch on his person, and without leaving a single piece of twisted metal in his wake. High above the battle centers, in a darkened observation room, the faculty of UA High School watched the carnage unfold on dozens of massive monitors. "We have a strong crop this year," Midnight purred, crossing her legs as she watched Katsuki Bakugo annihilate a three-pointer with a massive explosion. "That blonde boy is vicious. Pure combat instinct." "Indeed," Vlad King grunted. "The Gravity Girl is showing good situational awareness, too. But look at Battle Center B. We have an anomaly." At the center of the room, sitting in a plush leather chair, was Niza. The Chimera principal of UA steepled his paws together, his beady black eyes fixed entirely on one specific monitor. Standing behind him, wrapped in his yellow sleeping bag, Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, stared at the same screen. His bloodshot eyes were narrowed in intense scrutiny. On the screen, the boy in the brown robes was walking calmly down a street. A three-pointer lunged at him. The boy simply waved his hand. The three-pointer's internal gyroscope forcibly inverted, causing the massive machine to pitch forward and faceplant into the concrete, completely immobilized. The boy didn't even look back as he kept walking. Examinee 7111. "Izuku Midoriya," Niza murmured, pulling up a digital file on his tablet. "Fascinating. Simply fascinating. He isn't destroying our expensive hardware. He is surgically disabling them using an invisible, ranged force. Telekinesis, one would assume." "That's not the weird part," Aizawa said, his voice a low, raspy drawl. He tapped a few keys on the console, bringing up the biometric scans of the arena. Every applicant had a glowing aura on the screen, representing their active quirk factor. Bakugo was burning bright red. Uraraka was glowing pink. Izuku Midoriya was completely dark. "Look at the biometrics," Aizawa pointed out. "Our sensors measure the activation of the quirk factor, the biological energy required to use a quirk. Midoriya's readings are flatline. 0. Zilch. Perhaps an error in the sensors?" Midnight suggested, frowning. "I ran a diagnostic 10 minutes ago," Aizawa replied. "The sensors are fine. The kid is registering as a baseline, quirkless human. Whatever he is doing, it isn't coming from a biological mutation. It's coming from somewhere else." Niza's eyes gleamed with intense intellectual curiosity. "A power that defies modern biological science? How utterly thrilling. And look at his methodology. He fights without ego. He moves with an efficiency I have only seen in seasoned underground pros, yet he exhibits the serenity of a monk." "He's too calm," Aizawa noted, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "This environment is designed to induce panic. He's treating it like a stroll through a garden. We haven't seen his upper limit. We don't know what happens when he's pushed into a corner." Niza grinned, a slightly terrifying expression on his animalistic face. He reached forward toward a large red button on the console. "Then let us change the environment," the principal chimed. "Let's see if the monk can maintain his peace when the heavens fall." Niza pressed the button. With exactly 2 minutes remaining on the clock, the ground in Battle Center B violently bucked. Izuku paused mid-step, balancing perfectly as the asphalt rippled beneath his boots. A deafening roar of grinding gears and shattering concrete echoed through the artificial city. A few blocks away, an entire skyscraper was pushed aside like a child's toy. Emerging from the dust cloud was a mechanical leviathan. The zero-pointer. It was easily the size of a 10-story building. Its colossal treads crushed cars and pavement alike into fine powder. As it raised its massive, metallic arms, it let out a digitized screech that rattled the teeth of everyone in the arena. Panic, sudden and overwhelming, flared in the force. Izuku felt the terror of the other applicants like a physical shockwave. Screams filled the air. "Run! It's the zero-pointer! That thing is way too big! Time's almost up anyway!" The applicants turned and fled, sprinting away from the metallic titan as it began to lumber forward, its massive treads kicking up a blinding storm of debris. Izuku stood completely still. He looked up at the towering machine. It was certainly large, but compared to a separatist dreadnought or an AT-AT walker, it was nothing he couldn't handle. He prepared to turn and follow the others. There was no logical reason to engage an obstacle meant to be avoided. But then, a sharp, piercing spike of pain and terror cut through the force. Izuku's head snapped toward the source. Through the dust, near the base of the zero-pointer's treads, he saw her, Achiko Uraraka. The girl who had tripped earlier. Her leg was pinned beneath a massive slab of debris that had been dislodged by the robot's entrance. She was struggling desperately, her hands glowing pink as she tried to use her quirk to lift the rubble, but she was exhausted, and the slab was too heavy. The zero-pointer was moving directly toward her. In less than 20 seconds she would be crushed beneath its treads. Ida saw her, but he froze, his legs refusing to carry him back toward the monster. The others were already too far away. Izuku exhaled. His expression did not change to fear or anger. It settled into an absolute, chilling focus. He dropped his arms to his sides. His right hand brushed past the folds of his brown robe and found the cold, familiar metal of his lightsaber. He unclipped it from his belt. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me. Izuku opened his eyes. He pressed the activation stud. Snap hiss. A brilliant, blinding beam of pure emerald energy erupted from the metal hilt. The plasma blade stabilized, humming with a deep, resonant bass that vibrated through the air, cutting through the noise of the panic. The green light cast harsh, dramatic shadows across Izuku's determined face. Up in the observation room, Aizawa stood straight up, his eyes widening. What the hell is that? A localized plasma containment field? Where did he get that? Watch. Niza commanded, utterly captivated. Down in the arena, Izuku crouched. He channeled the force into his legs, feeling the energy coil within his muscles like a compressed spring. Force leap. The pavement beneath his boots shattered into a crater as he launched himself into the air. He didn't just jump, he flew. He soared over the heads of the fleeing applicants, leaving a trail of emerald light in his wake. Achiko looked up through her tears, her breath hitching. She saw the boy in the robe soaring through the dust cloud, a blazing green sword in his hand, looking like a descending god of war. Izuku reached the apex of his jump, directly level with the zero-pointer's massive head. The robot's optical sensor locked onto him. Obstacle detected, the machine boomed, raising a colossal hand to swat him out of the air. Izuku spun, avoiding the hand with an aerial twirl. He brought his lightsaber back, gripping the hilt with both hands. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the structural joints he could sense through the force. He swung the blade. The emerald plasma bit into the reinforced titanium of the zero-pointer. There was no resistance. The lightsaber sliced through the armor, the internal wiring, and the main drive shaft like a hot knife through butter. Sparks showered into the air like fireworks as the superheated metal melted instantly. Izuku fell past the robot, dragging the blade downward in a single, devastating, continuous cut. He cleaved the machine entirely in half, from its shoulder down to its waist. He landed softly on the ground, bending his knees to absorb the impact, perfectly positioning himself between Uraraka and the robot. Above them, a horrific groaning sound filled the air. The two massive halves of the zero-pointer began to slide apart. Thousands of tons of metal were falling directly toward them. We're going to be crushed. Achiko screamed, covering her head. Izuku deactivated his lightsaber with a sharp hiss, hooking it back onto his belt in a fluid motion. He stood tall, looking up at the falling mountain of metal. He extended both hands upward, his palms open. He took a deep breath, drawing deeply from the limitless well of the Force. Force push. It was not a directed blast. It was a massive, concussive dome of telekinetic energy. The invisible shockwave erupted upward with the force of a hurricane. The falling halves of the zero-pointer hit the invisible barrier, and violently rebounded. The sheer kinetic force of Izuku's push altered their trajectory mid-air, blasting the thousands of tons of metal backward. The two halves crashed into the empty fake city blocks behind them, sending a massive shockwave of dust and wind washing over the street. Izuku stood unmoved, his robes billowing wildly in the wind. Not a single piece of shrapnel had touched him, or the girl behind him. Silence descended upon Battle Center B. The only sound was the crackle of burning circuitry from the ruined Leviathan. The applicants, who had stopped running to watch, were frozen in absolute, jaw-dropping shock. Ida's glasses slipped down his nose. Izuku turned around. He knelt beside Uraraka. He reached out with a single hand, using a fraction of his telekinesis to lift the massive concrete slab off her leg, tossing it aside effortlessly. "Are you severely injured?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal, serene cadence. I. Achiko couldn't form words. She stared at him, then down at her leg. It's twisted. I think it's broken. Allow me, Izuku said softly. He placed his hands gently over her ankle. He closed his eyes. Achiko felt a sudden, intensely warm sensation seep through her skin. The throbbing, agonizing pain in her ankle vanished, replaced by a soothing coolness. When Izuku pulled his hands away, the swelling was entirely gone. "It is healed," Izuku said, offering her a hand. "You may stand." Achiko took his hand, pulling herself up. She put weight on her ankle. It was perfect. How did you do that?" "You have a telekinesis quirk, a laser sword quirk, and a healing quirk?" Before Izuku could attempt to explain that the force was not a quirk, the loud buzzer echoed through the city. "Time's up," President Mike announced. "The exam is over." Izuku offered Achiko a small, reassuring smile. "The trial is complete. You fought bravely." He turned and began to walk back toward the entrance gates, his posture relaxed, his hands returning to the sleeves of his robes. The crowd of applicants parted for him instinctively, parting like the Red Sea. They stared at him not just with awe, but with a deep, primal reverence. They had just witnessed power on a scale they couldn't comprehend, wielded by a boy who didn't even break a sweat. In the observation room, the silence was thicker than concrete. The monitors displayed the smoking, neatly bisected ruins of the zero-pointer. Vlad King was gripping the edge of the console so hard the plastic was cracking. Midnight had her hand over her mouth. Aizawa slowly unwrapped his scarf from his face, his eyes wide, completely abandoning his usual apathetic facade. He cut a Class A combat chassis in half with a blade of pure energy, and then deflected 3,000 tons of falling debris with his bare hands. And his biometric readings still didn't spike. Nisa stood up in his chair. The principal's paws were trembling, but not from fear. It was sheer, unadulterated excitement. "Eraserhead," Nisa squeaked, his voice pitching higher than usual. "Whatever this child is, whatever power he wields, it is going to change the entire world. I want him in Class 1A. No exceptions." Aizawa stared at the screen, watching the boy in the brown robes disappear into the crowd. "Yeah," the underground hero muttered. "I think we all need to keep a very close eye on Izuku Midoriya." The morning of his first day at UA High School, Izuku Midoriya awoke before the sun. He didn't need an alarm. His internal clock, calibrated by years of rising with the twin suns of Tatooine and the artificial dawn of the Coruscant Jedi Temple, roused him precisely at 4:30. He sat at the edge of his bed in the quiet dark of his bedroom, closed his eyes, and reached out. The Force greeted him like an old friend. He felt the rhythmic, steady heartbeat of his mother in the next room. Outside, he felt the scurrying of a stray cat in the alleyway, the slow blossoming of cherry blossoms down the street, and the distant, chaotic hum of millions of people waking up in the sprawling metropolis of Muzurifu. The energy of this world was loud and discordant, sharp with the biological anomalies they called quirks, but it was still life. And where there was life, there was the Force. Izuku spent an hour in deep meditation, centering his mind, releasing any lingering anxieties or expectations into the cosmic current. A Jedi did not anticipate the future with fear or excitement. A Jedi lived in the present moment, prepared to meet whatever the will of the Force dictated. When he finally emerged into the kitchen, dressed in a fresh set of traditional Jedi tunics, Inko was already making breakfast. She turned, a spatula in hand, and offered a soft, somewhat nervous smile. "Good morning, Izuku. You look very handsome in those clothes, but are you sure you don't want to wear the UA uniform?" "I ironed it last night." Izuku gently touched his mother's shoulder, sending a microscopic pulse of calming energy to soothe her nerves. "The uniform is designed to standardize the students, to build a cohesive unit. But I am not here to be standardized, Mom. These robes are not just clothing, they are a vow. A reminder of my duty to the light. Principal Nizu assured me in our correspondence that I am permitted to wear them as part of my hero costume accommodation. Inko sighed, her shoulders relaxing. All right. Just be careful, okay? I know you're a master, and you can take care of yourself, but you're still my boy. I will be careful, Izuku promised, bowing his head respectfully. The commute to UA was an exercise in sensory management. The train was packed with commuters. Izuku stood in the corner of the carriage, his hands tucked neatly into his wide brown sleeves, his hood pulled up to obscure his features. He could feel the eyes on him, sense the curiosity and mild apprehension radiating from the salarymen and students nearby. He let their emotions wash over him and fade away, untouched by their judgment. When he finally stepped through the massive gates of UA, the sun was fully above the horizon. The sprawling campus was a monument to hero society, grand, expensive, and designed to inspire awe. Izuku felt no awe. A building was just a building, whether it was made of glass and steel or the ancient stones of Tython. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors with ease, letting the force guide his steps until he stood before a door so comically large it seemed designed for giants. Emblazoned on the front was 1A. He reached out, his hand hovering over the handle, and sensed the presences inside. There were several distinct auras. One was rigidly disciplined, vibrating with a structured, almost mechanical energy. Another was bright, bubbly, and floating with natural buoyancy. And in the corner, radiating heat, anger, and deeply rooted insecurity, was a jagged tempest of fire. Izuku pushed the door open. The classroom was instantly recognizable from his mother's descriptions of modern Japanese schools, though slightly larger. Only a few students had arrived. Remove your foot from that desk immediately. Tenya Ida, the blue-haired boy from the entrance exam, was chopping his arms aggressively at Katsuki Bakugo, who was leaning back in his chair, his boots propped arrogantly on the desk. Huh! Who the hell are you to tell me what to do? Katsuki sneered, his crimson eyes narrowing. It is disrespectful to the upperclassmen who used this desk before us, and to the craftsmen who made it. I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy. Sama? So you're an elite prick, Katsuki scoffed. I'll have fun crushing you. Before Ida could respond, the heavy door slid shut with a soft click. Both boys turned their heads. Izuku stood at the front of the room. He had pushed his hood back, revealing his messy green curls. His serene emerald eyes swept over the room. Ida immediately stiffened, recognizing the boy who had effortlessly dissected his impatience during the auditorium orientation. He marched over to Izuku, bowing rigidly. You are the one from the entrance exam. I must apologize again for my previous behavior. You realized the true nature of the practical exam while the rest of us were blinded by aggression. I concede that you are the superior candidate. There is no superior or inferior, Tenya Ida, Izuku replied gently, placing a hand over his own heart in a traditional Jedi greeting. We all have different paths. Yours is built on discipline. Do not lose that. Oh. It's you! Achiko Uraraka bounded through the doorway behind Izuku, her face lighting up. She was wearing the standard UA uniform. The guy who saved me. I was hoping I'd see you again. I went to present Mike to ask him to give you some of my points, but he said you didn't need them. You were amazing out there. Izuku offered her a warm, small smile. I am glad to see your leg is fully functional, Achiko Uraraka. Deku. The words sliced through the friendly atmosphere like a serrated knife. Katsuki had kicked his desk away, standing up. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, trembling slightly. The sheer volume of rage boiling off him was a palpable weight in the force, heavy and suffocating. The other students in the room, including a boy with half-white, half-red hair sitting quietly in the back, turned to watch the confrontation. Katsuki stomped down the aisle, stopping inches from Izuku's face. He glared up, realizing with a spike of fresh irritation that Deku was now taller than him by 2 inches. I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, Katsuki hissed, his voice low and venomous. You go missing for a decade, and then you show up wearing a bathrobe, acting like you're some hotshot. You trick the pro heroes. You did some weird voodoo trick at the exam. But you can't fool me. You're quirkless. You've always been a quirkless nobody. Izuku did not flinch. He did not break eye contact. The absolute stillness of his posture was deeply unnerving to Katsuki, who was used to people cowering before his explosive temper. You are carrying a heavy burden of anger, Katsuki, Izuku said, his voice quiet, meant only for the blonde. It is burning you from the inside out. Shut up. Don't analyze me, you damn nerd. Katsuki snarled, a small explosion popping in his left palm. Tell me what your quirk is. Right now. Or I'll blast that calm look right off your stupid face. Izuku's eyes softened with genuine pity. He looked at Katsuki not as a rival, but as a lost, volatile child who had been fed a diet of supremacy by a flawed society. I have no quirk, Katsuki, Izuku said clearly, his voice carrying through the silent classroom. I have the Force. And it is a path you cannot comprehend while your mind is clouded by pride. Why you? Katsuki raised his hand, the smell of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin filling the air. If you're just here to socialize and pick fights, pack up your things and leave. The voice was dry, exhausted, and devoid of any enthusiasm. Everyone froze. Looking out into the hallway, they saw a man lying on the floor, fully encased in a bright yellow sleeping bag. He unzipped it and stood up, revealing a scruffy face, bloodshot eyes, and long, unkempt black hair. He wore a dark jumpsuit with a strange, thick scarf coiled around his neck. Izuku turned his head. He looked at the man. In the Force, this man felt like a black hole. Not evil, not the dark side, but a literal void. Energy seemed to warp and vanish around him. It was a fascinating biological phenomenon. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, the man sighed, stepping into the classroom. Time is limited. You kids aren't rational enough. He pulled a juice pouch from his pocket and took a sip. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Nice to meet you, the class collectively gasped. A homeroom teacher? He looked like a homeless vagrant. Right, let's get to it, Aizawa muttered, pulling a set of blue and white tracksuits from his sleeping bag. Put these P uniforms on and meet me out on the P grounds. As the class scrambled to grab the uniforms, Aizawa's tired eyes locked onto Izuku, who had not moved. Midoriya, Aizawa said, his tone flat. Mizu approved your wardrobe accommodation for general classes. But for physical assessments, you wear the uniform. No exceptions. Izuku bowed his head slightly. As you wish, Aizawa-sensei. A Jedi did not cling to material possessions, not even their robes. If the local authorities required standard garb, he would comply. The P grounds were vast and bathed in the bright morning sun. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in a loose cluster, fidgeting in their tracksuits. Izuku stood near the back, feeling strangely constricted. The synthetic fabric clung to his skin, lacking the breathable, loose freedom of his tunics. He had left his lightsaber in the locker room. A Jedi did not need a weapon for a physical test. A quirk apprehension test? The class shouted in unison. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked nervously. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa replied, his back turned to them. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how the teachers run their classes. Aizawa turned around, holding a softball. You kids have been doing these standardized tests since junior high, but without using your quirks. It's irrational. The Ministry of Education is procrastinating. He tossed the ball to Katsuki. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Katsuki grunted. Then, try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa pointed to the throwing circle. Anything goes, as long as you stay in the circle. Hurry up. Give it all you've got. Katsuki cracked his neck, a feral grin spreading across his face. He stepped into the circle, winding his arm back. I'll add a blast of momentum to the pitch. He threw the ball, screaming, die! A massive explosion erupted from his palm, launching the ball into the sky with a shockwave that ruffled the hair of the students. Aizawa held up a digital device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted into cheers, marveling at the distance. This looks like fun! A pink-skinned girl, Mina Ashido, cheered. We can use our quirks as much as we want. As expected of the hero course. A boy with black tape dispensers on his elbows added. Aizawa's eyes darkened, the black void around him in the force suddenly widening. Fun, you say? You have 3 years to become heroes. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? He smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. The class recoiled in horror. Izuku remained perfectly still. He reached out with his senses, brushing against Aizawa's mind. There was no murderous intent, no malice. Only a cold, calculated logic. A deception, Izuku realized. A psychological tactic to force them to break past their perceived limits. It was a crude method, rooted in fear rather than inspiration, but Izuku could see its utilitarian value. He chose to remain silent. The tests began. The 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired with a boy who had an engine quirk in his legs. When the starting gun fired, Izuku did not run. He used force speed. He drew the energy of the earth up through his legs and moved in a blur, covering the distance in 3.01 seconds, barely edging out Ida. He hadn't even kicked up dust. The grip strength test. A large boy with multiple arms crushed the machine with 540 kilograms of force. Izuku took the device. He didn't squeeze with his muscles. He wrapped the device in a localized telekinetic field and compressed it. The digital numbers spun wildly until the metal handle snapped. The machine read error, overload. Through it all, Aizawa watched Izuku like a hawk. He noted that the boy's quirk factor still wasn't registering on his pocket scanner. It was infuriatingly impossible. Finally, they arrived at the softball throw. Uraraka stepped up, touching the ball and removing its gravity. She threw it with a gentle toss, and it floated upward endlessly. Aizawa showed the screen, infinity. Midoriya, Aizawa called out. You're up. Izuku walked to the throwing circle. He picked up a softball from the bucket. It was light, made of synthetic leather and quirk. He stepped into the white chalk circle and looked out over the vast, empty field. Up until this point, Izuku had been using microscopic, subtle applications of the force. He had no desire to show off. But he also understood that this society measured worth in spectacle. If he wanted to operate freely, to be left alone by the bureaucratic machine of UA, he needed to establish a baseline that they could not question. He needed to demonstrate mastery. Izuku stood sideways, holding the ball in his right hand. He didn't wind up. He simply closed his eyes and breathed. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. The underground hero gripped his scarf. Let's see what you really are, Midoriya, Aizawa thought. If you have a telekinetic quirk, I'm going to erase it right at the point of release. Let's see you adapt to sudden failure. Aizawa activated his quirk. Erasure. His eyes glowed a fierce, bloody red. His black hair defied gravity, floating up around his face in a halo of dark energy. He stared intensely at the back of Izuku's head, applying the quirk-canceling effect. Izuku felt it. It was a bizarre sensation. Suddenly a cold, heavy blanket fell over his biological body. Aizawa's quirk was trying to suppress his genetic mutations, aggressively seeking out the quirk factor in his DNA to paralyze it. But Izuku didn't have a quirk factor. The force did not reside in a specific organ, or a mutated strand of DNA. The force was the space between his cells. It was the air he breathed, the dirt beneath his feet, the sunlight warming his skin. Aizawa was trying to turn off the ocean by glaring at a single drop of water. Izuku opened his eyes. They glowed with an ethereal, luminous green light. He didn't throw the ball with his arm. He simply tossed it lightly into the air in front of him. As the ball hung suspended for a fraction of a second, Izuku thrust his open palm forward, unleashing a concentrated, massive shockwave of telekinetic energy. Force push. Boom! The sound was like a cannon firing. The sheer concussive force of the push displaced the air so violently that a shockwave ripped across the field, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and nearly knocking the front row of students off their feet. Katsuki had to cross his arms to avoid being blown backward. The softball vanished. It didn't arc. It didn't curve. It drew a perfectly straight, invisible line through the sky, tearing through the lower atmosphere with a supersonic crack. The silence that followed was deafening. Izuku slowly lowered his hand, his breathing completely even. The ethereal glow faded from his eyes. Aizawa stood frozen. His hair was still floating. His red eyes were wide in absolute shock. He looked down at the digital tracking device in his hand. The numbers were scrolling so fast they were a blur, until finally, the screen flashed red. Error. Object escaped atmosphere. My quirk, Aizawa rasped, his voice barely a whisper. His hair fell back to his shoulders as he deactivated his power. He stepped forward, marching into the circle, grabbing Izuku by the shoulder of his tracksuit. I looked right at you. I used erasure. I felt it connect. Why didn't your power vanish? What the hell are you? The students gasped, sensing the sudden tension. Izuku did not shrug off the teacher's hand. He turned to face Aizawa, his expression calm, bearing the intense scrutiny with the patience of a saint. Your ability is fascinating, Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said politely. You project a localized suppressive field that paralyzes the biological functions of a quirk. It is highly effective on this world. Answer the question, Aizawa demanded, his grip tightening. Why didn't it work on you? Because, sensei, you were trying to erase something that does not exist, Izuku explained quietly, ensuring only Aizawa could hear the full depth of his words. My power is not a biological mutation. It is not tied to my DNA. It does not draw upon my physical stamina. What I wield is the energy of the universe itself. The life force that binds you, me, the earth, and the stars. You cannot erase the force, sensei, any more than you can erase gravity by glaring at it. Aizawa stared into Izuku's emerald eyes. There was no deception there. There was no teenage arrogance. There was only ancient, unshakable truth. Aizawa slowly released his grip, stepping back. For the first time in his career, the underground hero felt completely out of his depth. He had dedicated his life to neutralizing superhuman threats, but standing before him was a boy who operated on a completely different axis of reality. Aizawa held up the tracking device to the class, not saying a word. The screen still read error, escaped atmosphere. The class erupted. Infinity wasn't enough? Now we have a guy throwing things into orbit? He didn't even wind up. He just waved his hand. What is he, a god? Only Katsuki Bakugo wasn't cheering. He was trembling, staring at Izuku's back with a mixture of profound terror and boiling, incandescent rage. It's a lie, Katsuki thought frantically. It has to be a trick. Deku is a pebble. A pebble. When the test concluded, Aizawa revealed the deception regarding the expulsion, much to the relief of the class. Izuku had placed first overall, despite holding back on most of the physical endurance tests. As the students headed back to the locker rooms, Aizawa watched Izuku walk away. The force, Aizawa thought, pulling out his eye drops. Mizu, you crazy rat. What kind of monster have you let into my classroom? The afternoon brought the Foundational Hero Studies class. Izuku was sitting at his desk, deep in a light meditative trance, when a massive presence erupted in the force outside the door. It felt like a blinding, roaring sun, though around its edges, Izuku could sense the dark, fraying threads of severe injury and fading vitality. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might, the symbol of peace, burst into the room. He was wearing his silver-aged costume, his massive cape billowing behind him. The class went wild, cheering for the number one hero. Izuku opened his eyes and observed the man. He had met All Might briefly during his mother's crash course on modern society. He recognized the man's noble spirit, but seeing him in person, bathed in the adulation of the students, Izuku felt a tinge of sorrow. All Might was carrying the weight of a world that refused to carry itself. It was a tragically unsustainable model of peacekeeping. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. All Might boomed, striking a pose. Here, you will learn the basics of being a pro. And today's lesson is battle training. He pressed a button, and the wall slid open, revealing numbered metal cases. And to go with it, the costumes you requested before school started. Get suited up and meet me at Ground Beta. 10 minutes later, Class 1A walked out of the tunnel into the massive, full-urban environment of Ground Beta. There were a riot of colors, armor, spandex, and support gear. Katsuki Bakugo looked particularly menacing with his massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets. Izuku emerged last. He had not requested a skin-tight suit, nor any armor. His hero costume was simply a highly refined version of his Jedi robes, tailored specifically for him by UA's support companies based on his designs. The undertunic was a deep, forest green, made of a heavily reinforced, fire-retardant weave. Over it, he wore a sleeveless, dark brown outer tunic, with traditional tabards that fell past his knees. His belt was a dark, polished leather, holding several pouches for emergency medical supplies, and of course, the silver and black hilt of his lightsaber. He wore dark brown trousers and sturdy, shin-high leather boots with reinforced soles. He wore a dark brown outer cloak, the hood pulled down over his shoulders. He looked like a warrior monk from a forgotten era, stepping onto a modern battlefield. Midoriya, my boy! All Might boomed. A very traditional look. But where is your protective gear? Is that fabric enough? A Jedi's protection comes from the Force, All Might, Izuku replied calmly. And from avoiding the strike entirely. All Might blinked, not quite understanding, but laughed heartily anyway. Excellent. Now, let's get down to it. The scenario is simple. Villains have hidden a nuclear weapon in a hideout. Heroes must infiltrate, and either capture the villains or secure the weapon within the time limit. We will draw lots to determine teams. The teams were drawn. Izuku found himself paired with Ochiko Uraraka as Team A. Yay! We're a team, Midoriya! Uraraka cheered, pumping her fist. I am honored to work with you, Uraraka, Izuku said with a polite bow. And your opponents? Team D! All Might announced, holding up the balls. Izuku looked up. Standing across the group, Katsuki Bakugo was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated murder. Ida stood beside Bakugo, looking stern and ready. Team A will be the heroes. Team D will be the villains. All Might declared. Villains, go inside and set up. Heroes, you have 5 minutes to plan. Inside the monitoring room, the rest of Class 1A watched the screens intently. All Might stood at the console, leaning close to the microphone. All right, the time is up. Team A, infiltrate. Down on the ground, Izuku and Uraraka stood before the entrance of the multi-storied building. So, what's the plan, Midoriya? Uraraka asked, tapping her chin. Bakugo seems to really hate you. I bet he's going to come straight for us. You are correct. His anger makes him predictable, Izuku said calmly. He unclasped his heavy brown outer cloak, letting it fall to the floor, leaving him in his green and brown tunics. He will not wait to defend the objective. He will hunt me. Therefore, we will divide. I will intercept Katsuki. You will proceed to the top floor and locate Tenya Ida and the weapon. Are you sure? He looked really scary. Uraraka asked worriedly. Do not fear for me, Izuku smiled. May the Force be with you. They entered the building through a window, sneaking down the first corridor. They didn't make it far. Izuku felt the spike of malice in the Force a split second before it happened. Stop, he commanded, throwing an arm out to halt Uraraka. From around the corner ahead, Katsuki Bakugo leaped into view, his right arm pulled back, his palm glowing with intense heat. He unleashed a massive, point-blank explosion aimed directly at Izuku's face. The blast echoed through the concrete halls, filling the corridor with smoke and fire. In the monitor room, the class screamed. A surprise attack? Ashido cried out. That's so unmanly. Down in the smoke-filled hallway, Katsuki landed on his feet, grinning savagely. A quick right hook to start things off. The smoke cleared. Izuku stood exactly where he had been. He hadn't dodged. He hadn't been blown back. In his right hand, gripped loosely but securely, was his lightsaber. The emerald plasma blade hummed furiously. Izuku had ignited the weapon and stepped in front of the blast, using the magnetic containment field of the plasma blade to absorb and part the explosion perfectly around him and Uraraka. Not a single hair on Izuku's head was singed. The low, resonant hum of the lightsaber filled the hallway. Katsuki stared at the glowing green sword, his eye twitching. So that's your little support item, huh? You gonna try and slice me up, Deku? Go, Uraraka, Izuku said softly, never taking his eyes off Katsuki. Uraraka nodded quickly and bolted down a side hallway, using her quirk to lighten her footsteps. Katsuki ignored her completely. His target was the boy in front of him. Izuku shifted his stance. He did not raise his lightsaber above his head in an attacking posture. He did not point the tip at Katsuki. Instead, he pulled his right arm back, holding the blade close to his body, angled downward and away. He extended his left hand forward, his first two fingers pointing toward Bakugo in a gesture of absolute, unyielding defense. It was the opening stance of Form 3, Sorisu. The Way of the Mimic. The ultimate defensive lightsaber form, designed to outlast any opponent by utilizing minimal energy and providing maximum protection. I will not attack you, Katsuki, Izuku said peacefully. I am only here to stop you. That was the final straw. The idea that Deku wouldn't even deem him worthy of an attack shattered the remnants of Katsuki's restraint. Don't look down on me! Katsuki roared, launching himself forward, propelled by explosions from his hands. He swung a devastating right hook, aiming a blast right at Izuku's chest. Izuku didn't flinch. As the explosive fist neared, Izuku simply pivoted on his heel. He didn't block the punch. He stepped inside Katsuki's guard, letting the explosion detonate harmlessly behind him. As Katsuki flew past, carried by his own momentum, Izuku gently tapped the back of Katsuki's knee with the hilt of his lightsaber, sending the blonde stumbling forward into the wall. Damn it! Katsuki roared, spinning around. He unleashed a flurry of rapid-fire explosions, closing the distance in a frenzy of fire and noise. Izuku became a blur of motion. Sorisu was not about overpowering the enemy. It was about existing in the eye of the hurricane. Izuku's lightsaber moved in tight, efficient arcs. The emerald blade flashed, intercepting every single blast. The heat of the explosions was absorbed by the plasma. Katsuki swung high. Izuku ducked, bringing his blade up to parry the resulting blast. Katsuki kicked low. Izuku leapt lightly into the air, doing a backflip, landing gracefully 5 feet away. In the monitor room, the class was completely silent. He's not fighting back, Eijiro Kurishima said, his jaw hanging open. He's just dodging. But it doesn't look like he's running away. He looks completely in control. Midoriya's movements are perfectly calculated, Yaoyorozu observed, her eyes wide with analytical awe. Bakugo is expending massive amounts of stamina with those large blasts, but Midoriya is using almost zero energy. He's letting Bakugo defeat himself. Down in the building, Katsuki was panting heavily. Sweat poured down his face. His palms were stinging from the rapid firing. And yet Deku stood there, not even breathing hard, holding that damn green sword in that defensive stance, his face a mask of serene pity. Fight me! Katsuki screamed, tears of absolute frustration pricking the corners of his eyes. Punch me! Use your damn quirk. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, Katsuki. Never for attack, Izuku replied steadily. I'll kill you! Katsuki raised his right arm, grabbing the pin of his massive grenade gauntlet. If I don't hit you directly, you won't die. Young Bakugo, stop. Are you trying to kill him? All Might's panicked voice blared over the intercom. Katsuki didn't listen. He pulled the pin. A massive, concentrated blast of fire and concussive force tore through the hallway, obliterating the walls and ceiling, hurtling toward Izuku like a freight train of destruction. Izuku didn't move. He didn't run. He deactivated his lightsaber and clipped it to his belt. He raised both hands, palms facing the incoming inferno. He closed his eyes and sank entirely into the force. He didn't try to stop the explosion. That would require too much brute strength. Instead, he manipulated the space around him. He created a localized telekinetic bubble, angled sharply like the hull of a ship. The explosion hit the invisible wedge and split perfectly in two. The roaring fire parted around Izuku, washing over the walls and blowing out the windows behind him, leaving him standing in a perfect, untouched pocket of cool air. When the smoke cleared, Katsuki was on his knees, gasping for air, his right arm trembling violently from the recoil. He looked up, expecting to see Deku charred, or at least frightened. Izuku walked slowly out of the smoke. His robes were untouched. He stopped in front of the kneeling Katsuki. With a casual wave of his hand, Izuku used the force to snap the pins off Katsuki's gauntlets, rendering them useless. Then, with a gentle force pull, he brought a length of capture tape from his belt, wrapping it securely around Katsuki's wrists. "You are captured, Katsuki," Izuku said softly. Katsuki stared at the floor. His pride, his worldview, his entire sense of self, had just been systematically dismantled without the other boy throwing a single punch. A hot tear of humiliation dripped off his chin, hitting the concrete. Why didn't you hit me?" Katsuki whispered brokenly. Izuku knelt down, resting a gentle hand on Katsuki's trembling shoulder. "Because you are not my enemy, Katsuki," Izuku said, his voice filled with an ancient, unconditional compassion. "You are just hurting, and striking a man who is already hurting in his soul is not the way of the Force. I forgive you." Over the intercom, All Might's voice cut through the silence, shaky and awestruck. "T-May, the heroes win." Izuku stood up, offering his hand to the defeated blonde boy, a true master in a world that had forgotten what true strength looked like.